All right, so some interesting thoughts here that I had a couple of days ago. I, reread Genesis, and I've been, listening to a lot of interesting YouTube videos on Gnosticism and other, and I have a lot of I've studied a lot of religions outside of the default Christianity that we all sort of like take for granted as the predominant religion of the West, which we all sort of have like our idea of what Christianity means, but what does it really mean? Who knows? It's equated to a lot of things. For me, I've often felt, I've often objected to the way Christianity was presented and sort of forced on me as a child, because it felt very unnatural and counter sincere, counter to what I consider sincere, a sincere desire to interface with spirit. To me, often the way it is presented as more of like a social code of conduct. And so to me, it's like, I think if you talk about, what is heretical, what is a heretic, what is what is blasphemous? To me, what is blasphemous is when you use religion and, to indoctrinate people and control them and not really bring them to the spirit, but actually the net effect of what you're doing is taking them away from the spirit. You're taking them further away from self, self being the spirit, the prime self, the God self, the primordial human being, the spirit that flows into it, from an untainted sense. So, that's sort of Christianity always, did a good service of, turning me off from Christianity. But, when we look at, the Bible and stuff with, fresh eyes and without the, sort of prejudice of, anti-religious feelings that because of like how religion is presented as something that is, a social code of dominance over us, trying to stand in effect to stand in between us and God. So that is essentially the function of Western Christianity, is to stand between us and God and to essentially make us feel like shit. And that's my personal experience. Perhaps your experience is different than that, but that's fundamentally, that's where my problem is with it. So, but, I cannot, discount the, powerful effect that Christianity has had on me, because we're sort of, surrounded by it. So, of course, it's going to have a deep imprint in all of us who like grow up in the Western culture, whether we like it or not. We are all, Christianity plays some sort of role in our psychology, and probably has like some deep connectedness to between us and our sense of self. And I think most of us sort of, instinctively, like when we think of Jesus's teachings and we object to the way Christians, conduct themselves, we think, well, that's not, that's not the way Jesus would behave. And in that sense, we're sort of like taking Jesus's side against these heretics. that call themselves Christians. So, and I want to say this, with a little bit of tongue in cheek, because, I want it to be, not to sound like I'm overly serious when I say, these Christians are heretics, they are against the true religion, and I am, here to be the cult leader. No, that's not what my intention is. But, yeah, so I'm looking at Christianity more, with a fresh perspective, and I find it, very interesting, particularly, the Gnostic sort of form of Christianity, which I believe is, a more recent discovery of, something that, a branch of early Christianity that was somewhat, unpopular in terms of, with the political establishment, which later on sort of, co-opted Christianity and turned it into a systematic, political form of dominance. So, Gnosticism has a lot in common with, Eastern, mysticism, Buddhism, Hinduism, in terms of like, the world illusion and sort of, transcending, the world appearance and becoming sort of finding a freedom, and finding freedom from judgment and freedom from the traps of the world, essentially, the things that the images that we believe, and the real reward for trying to pursue those images, because we get, our mouth starts salivating at this image, and then we pursue the image, we capture it in some physical sense, and then we're like, oh fuck, this tastes like dog shit or something, like this wonderful thing that I thought was really beautiful in my mind, when it comes to the actual reality of it, maybe that's not for me. But most of us are so married to our images that even when we're like eating a dog shit sandwich, we're still like, oh yeah, this tastes delicious, because we're like, some part of our sense of self is so embedded in this idea that this is where satisfaction comes from. Anyhow, so yeah, Gnosticism, interesting take on Christianity. I very much like it. Sort of, there's almost like a dark humor about Gnosticism, because like Jesus almost like doesn't take himself super serious, because like he's like on the cross, and he's like fucking, the spirit leaves him, and then what's left is like the body without the Christ, and the body's like, what the fuck, why have you forsaken me? Because it's like, now you're just a man again, and you're like, holy shit, this fucking sucks, I'm dying on the cross, this is ass. Anyhow, so, and then like another version of Jesus is like standing on the hill, and he's like explaining it to some fucking person. I think maybe, I don't know who it was, maybe it was Judas, I don't know, but he's like, oh yeah, look at poor Jesus over there, he's like dying. And then above him is like another version of Jesus, and like all these different versions of Jesus like represents like different parts, like like the spirit, the body, whatever. I don't remember all the words that were used, but I think it's very kind of funny. And then there's like one version of Jesus that's sort of like laughing at the dying Jesus on the cross. So I don't know, it's something very, it's very, because I'm a Capricorn, maybe that's why this sort of, the word Saturnine, it's sort of like darkness, it's kind of like dark humor. I kind of like that, a Jesus who doesn't take himself too serious. Anyhow, so yeah, beyond this, I was trying to sort of lay the foundation for what I was going to talk about. I kind of got off on a tangent, but the real thing that I wanted to talk about was what's interesting to me when I read Genesis. It's very brief, it's not a whole lot there, and it feels like there's a lot missing, like a lot of missing context. And so, because there's a lot of missing context, the suspicion I have is, a lot of things were edited out and deleted from the original sort of envisioning of this, early form of, the proto-Jews who came up with this stuff. But, what I found interesting is, what the briefness and the lack of context sort of allows us to kind of like, we look at this thing that we know as Genesis, and we can be sort of like investigators. Well, what does this point to? With this amount of evidence, what meaning could I derive, from this? What were they trying to say? So, and I feel like there's so much in Genesis. There's so much information there, hiding, waiting to be sort of interpreted. If you like really look at the words closely and try to decipher, okay, what is being said here? Because, a lot of us, from Christian, we take sort of for granted, like what it means. And we sort of believe what it means. Well, it's what, it's what our parents said it means. So we don't really look at it, and we don't really think about it. And we don't really, for most people, it seems to be, who, call themselves Christian, it's sufficient to, whatever was that their early understanding as a child, understood it to mean when their parents taught them this. That's sort of like where their understanding is left, and then they don't really investigate it further, and they might even feel a little bit afraid to look at it, because it's like now they feel like they're defying something that makes them feel safe as a human being, because you don't question, things that make you feel safe, because that might, that might conflict with your survival strategy, essentially, or, whatever. Anyhow, so, I was thinking about, God created, what I wanted to go in about Gnosticism is, in Gnosticism, like Yahweh, or, I'm not sure, there's like the demiurge is like this God that is essentially creates the world. And so, what I've gathered is Yahweh is like, he is actually this demiurge. So the God that of the Jews and of Christianity is not necessarily the prime God, like the God beyond this manifestation of God, but the sort of like the creator of the universe. And so the way the Bible reads to me is kind of like a God learning how to be a God. And so like, it's almost like when you read it, the Genesis part, it sounds kind of naive, like, okay, yeah, I made this thing, and yeah, that's pretty good. Like, I like that, that's good. I'm gonna do that, okay. Then he makes another thing, he's like, oh, yeah, that's cool. Like, I'm on a roll here, I'm making really cool shit. Anyway, so, that I find interesting. So he's like figuring out how to manifest. He's becoming more and more skilled in his manifesting powers. So then, he creates the Garden of Eden. And, he creates Adam, he creates Eve. And, this is all sort of like divine perfection. He's created this. But, what's interesting to me is, he puts this tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. He puts that in there. And it's never really explained in the version of Genesis that we have. Why does he put that there? That's kind of weird. He puts this tree in there that might be poisonous in the perfect Garden of Eden. So, what it implies is it has, in order for the Garden of Eden to be perfect, it has to be there. The tree of the knowledge of the fruit of good and evil has to be there. It has to be there. Well, and what else has to be there? Well, man and woman have to be there for the Garden of Eden to be perfect. And so, what I gather from that is, it has to be there in order for, what does it represent? It represents this thing that we're told not to go near, lest die or something. So it's put there so we know that it's something dangerous. But we don't really know the full extent to how it is dangerous to us. So we know that there is something that we don't know. So we know that there is something beyond our knowledge, but it's dangerous to pursue. Which is, often in our lives, we know, like if we go into uncharted territories that, we will, in order to learn, we are probably going to, go in the wrong direction, make mistakes and all this sort of stuff. And then, we become wise and then we know better. And then we learn. So, yeah, it's like this tree is just there. And it's not exactly explained why he put it there, but we can, sort of through deductive reason, we can kind of figure out, okay, it represents something, it sort of represents the unknown. It's part of what it represents. And the unknown has to exist. The unknown has to exist, and it is dangerous for us to interact with the unknown. We have everything we need in the Garden of Eden. It is perfect. But, regardless of whether or not we know that it's perfect, the unknown still exists. So it's a symbol for the unknown, but it's also a symbol for temptation. And that is interesting because that implies temptation is perfect within the eyes of God. That within the Garden of Eden, before Adam and Eve ate of the fruit, he created a thing that is inevitably going to create this feeling of temptation, of like wanting to interact with the unknown. Now, within that temptation is a choice, to remain in this sort of perfect divine state or to choose a different path, to go into the unknown and find out, essentially to become ignorant. Because when we begin our journey into the unknown, we start out as ignorant. And so basically, we step away from ourselves, we eat the knowledge of the fruit of good and evil, and now we basically have to start from, with very little information, and we have to sort of acquire, rediscover how to become perfect again, because we ventured into the unknown. And so, but, I want to go back to the, what interests me is that, in the supreme perfect state in paradise, what is implied is there always exists temptation. Temptation is part of perfection. And so, many of us go on this journey where we follow our temptations and we learn what is on the other side of our temptations. It might be a beautiful image that turns into a dog shit sandwich, which, I've talked about that earlier. But, I think part of that journey that we go on from when we eat the fruit of the knowledge of, the tree of good and evil is, we learn that we can never really quench our thirst for temptation. In order to be a perfected being in paradise, we have to know temptation exists, and that what we can learn from this is that we don't actually have to act on temptation. We don't have to. The choice is there, but we don't have to suffer the consequences. Within the temptation itself sort of lies, the call of adventure, to adventure, but also wisdom exists within temptation. And the question is, do we need to go on every adventure that we feel tempted to go on? And we sort of most of us learn that we don't. And to sometimes, resist that urge to temptation is what allows us to become more loving, kind, and responsible, adults, parents, friends, because there's all these traps, in relationships where we get tempted to act out in a certain way. And, those of us who have some instinct for maturity learn that, I don't have to, I can be with it myself, and this temptation can exist within me, and I can coexist with this temptation, and it doesn't destroy my ego, my sense of self, to not assert myself in this way, to have to learn this difficult lesson that is only really going to end in chaos and destruction. So, what is the Garden of Eden? It is paradise. It is, perfection. It is, but within perfection exists temptation, and to make peace with that temptation, to allow us to live with it without actually having to eat of this fruit that we know is dangerous. That's an interesting skill that we sort of learn to, discover and value as we, mature into, more fully formed, wise human beings. Anyhow, so I thought this stuff was interesting. Thought I'd share it. Anyhow, that's all for now.